Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about diversity and inclusion, specifically in the oil and gas industry. Before we get into it, please be sure to like this video, subscribe so you can get more content in oil and gas and professional development topics, and please be sure to comment on the video below so I can incorporate your feedback into future videos. Please be sure to hit that notification bell when you do subscribe because I upload every Friday and every Sunday. Every Friday is a professional development topic, and every Sunday is a technical review. Well, let's get to the content. I want to make a disclaimer regarding this video that all my thoughts are my own, not representative of any of the associations that I'm a part of. These are my observations on diversity and inclusion in the oil and gas industry, so please take it for what it is. You all know that diversity and inclusion is a hot topic not just in the oil and gas industry, but for many sectors. Diversity and inclusion has made great strides from the past decades because we have people of all sorts of representations breaking the glass ceiling, the bamboo ceiling, you name it. My overall message regarding diversity and inclusion in this video is that we have made great strides and we should keep going. My first thought in diversity and inclusion is that there are more platforms compared to what I have seen in the past. In 2016, there is an example of Women in Energy that was created in the Society of Petroleum Engineers. This was meant to enhance the awareness of diversity and inclusion in the oil and gas industry. In 2020, this standing committee now turned into the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. This committee has made great progress in raising awareness on diversity and inclusion, how it can be incorporated into conversations, how you can approach the topic of diversity and inclusion, and even what types of diversity and inclusion are out there. There's lunch diversity, there's not just diversity in background, but there's also diversity in ability. And I can go on and on about this. But what I would like to say is there are many more platforms in this generation on diversity and inclusion compared to the past, which has allowed us to raise a lot more awareness on the importance of having diversity and inclusion in our organizations. Now you may ask the question, sure, there are a lot of associations that talk about diversity and inclusion, but has that been incorporated into organizations? I can't speak for every organization, but I will say that because of this awareness, there are more companies that are out there that are making diversity and inclusion and implementation as part of their organization. I would like to say that there are companies that are making great strides in diversity and inclusion, making that an important facet in how organizations are run and even growing their organization. I will not say that every single organization is at the same level in terms of the diversity and inclusion. I will say that there's been great strides in that area as well because of the awareness and the importance of diversity and inclusion and the data that's out there in terms of how diversity and inclusion is beneficial for everyone. Some data that I can mention that I'll also post in the description below is how diversity and inclusion creates innovation, and innovation creates a benefit for companies. Diversity and inclusion on a board, for instance, is seen very favorably in terms of increasing your funding. So diversity and inclusion creates a lot of benefits, not just socially, but financially. I would also like to talk about how there's been a discussion on diversity and inclusion when it comes to metrics. There are diversity and inclusion metrics that some organizations may have, and this comes into an argument or some debate on whether if you need to meet a certain quota, depending on what kind of background the person has. I would like to say that from what I've observed, there hasn't been so much focus on the quota for diversity as opposed to hiring the best people regardless of the background. Diversity and inclusion ought to be implemented that way, and I believe that's what the original message is for in having the brand diversity and inclusion, or the concept of diversity and inclusion, that regardless of the background, when checking your unconscious biases, for instance, which everybody has, to make sure that you're hiring the best people in your team, regardless of where they come from or regardless of their abilities that are external to what the required abilities are for their job. I want to emphasize that you cannot have diversity without inclusion. I've mentioned this before in a previous recording of a podcast on Society of Petroleum Engineers, that diversity is an invitation to the party, but inclusion is getting asked to dance. With diversity, you can have people of all backgrounds, but if you don't include their thoughts or their input in an organization, then the concept of diversity or the idea of diversity just falls apart. So making sure that you have diversity and inclusion together are some of my thoughts in terms of they should not be mutually exclusive. My next thought in diversity and inclusion is that there are levels. In that diversity and inclusion exists on different levels for different minorities. For instance, I'll put some data here, but for those that have a background of Latin American or African American, recruitment, for instance, in the oil and gas industry or in STEM is a challenge. For those that have an Asian background or ethnicity, the mentorship and sponsorship is where the challenges come from in career advancement. If you look at the Atlantic article called The Bamboo Glass Ceiling, it'll explain a lot more in that phenomena and how diversity and inclusion comes into play. But that's also what I want to share, in that diversity and inclusion is used as a blanketed term quite a bit, and people have different interpretations of how diversity and inclusion ought to be implemented, and we should keep that in mind. My last thought on diversity and inclusion is that diversity and inclusion should be implemented and not just talked about. Yes, there are many platforms on diversity and inclusion, but having to act on it, such as leading by example, is a great way to do it. That's something that I'd like to talk about too. When I get asked, how are you an advocate in diversity and inclusion? One of my biggest answers is that I lead by example. When I lead by example, I focus on the technical things, the things that I really like to do. I express my interest in STEM. I take on leadership positions, not necessarily fighting or anything. I'm just being myself. And for those of you who want to talk and implement diversity and inclusion, I would suggest that you do the same. Continue doing the things that you like to do. Be sure to express your feelings and check your unconscious biases. And know that if you want to keep it as a value, make sure you act on the diversity and inclusion concept as well. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. I hope you took something out of my thoughts on diversity and inclusion. As usual, please be sure to like this video, subscribe so you can get more content in oil and gas and professional development topics, and please be sure to comment on the video so I can incorporate your feedback as well. Please be sure to talk about what are your thoughts on diversity and inclusion, agree or disagree with my thoughts. And I know that since this is a large topic, it's hard to condense it in a video that I know people will have the attention span for. Well, with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.